Hey guys, quick update here. I'm recording this from my living room because a few things happened between recording this episode and trying to release it. We plan to release it Thursday, the 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. But what happened was I got the flu, and I'm the guy who edits these and puts them together, so I had no ability to do that week. And then the second thing that happened is the interview that we did with Shane went really long in a good way. And so it's too long for one normal episode of ours. We're going to split it up into two. So what you're about to watch today or listen to is just part one of 2 parts of this interview. And next week, we're going to release that second part. So without further ado, here's the episode.
And welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Glad you are here. We've brought in C.S. Lewis. I'm just kidding. We have a special guest today.
Yep. The S in C.S. Lewis stands for Shane J. Wood.
I only called him that because of this chair. It looks very British. And you said earlier that that's the voice you wish you had sometimes, or at least the way your books would be written and listened to. Well, I like to picture that there's somebody else out there right now that actually is the new C.S. Lewis.
There you go.
I'm not saying it's maybe us. But I'm saying
Clive, if you're listening.
I wouldn't claim that remotely.
Well, Shane, thanks so much for being on here. We've actually had some great pre-podcast discussions.
We'll see if it makes it in.
We'll see if it
If
does.
there's an easy way to help it flow in.
We have traveled a good distance already, but we
Yeah.
got to get back on track. We've met with you a number of years ago over your first book, Between Two Trees. A brilliant book, great
I think it was
read.
podcast episode 49 or early 50s.
Wow.
Because
Well,
I showed up at 46.
Well,
Well, it was
it's-
like in a month, I was like, have you heard about this guy? His name is Shane Wood. He's super smart.
I
And,
think you said it just like that,
yeah.
too.
Listen, Trevor.
Well, we just celebrated 200, so that's been a while ago.
Wow.
And you should at least show them some clips later. We did a
I will.
hot peanut challenge, and it
Oh, it
was
was great.
awful.
It was
so
criminal.
much hotter than either of us thought. Hot
God.
ones makes me just like the quiver at the thought.
So we're trying to do hot ones where it's like hot sauces, but then they ask you a long-winded question.
Oh my!
And so you have to like
gosh.
explain something. So we're trying to find the best questions for each other.
It was-
Sorry if you're listening and you've already seen that episode.
We
We're just
tortured each
rehashing
other.
it. But if you haven't seen that episode, you should go back. It's episode 200.
That's amazing.
So it was like he's into fitness and disc golf and some other stuff. And so it'd be like,
Yeah, but you also pulled like a picture out from my sat next to my girlfriend with my wife on the other side in youth group. And I was like,
Yeah,
how
I did.
much deep diving do you have to do to get this picture?
5 minutes. A text
creepy.
conversation
Oh my
with
gosh.
Katrina.
That's creepy.
I just texted his wife and she was like, here's all this dirt.
Good Lord.
Thank you
I'm
for
eating a
that.
hot peanut. I don't need to be sweating for other reasons.
But you know, it's like I'm into music, I'm into coffee or whatever. I'm really into coffee. And so question 5 after the hottest peanut was like, what's the best way to make coffee?
Scovilles.
That's the whole question. And I was like, okay, well, if you're doing this, if you like black coffee, you should probably stay away from Americanos. They're good, but they take a lot of work and they're not. I'm dying. And
Gosh,
It was
great.
It was a great one.
that's crazy.
Well, since evidently we've it's been a minute since we've seen you.
Yep.
You've been on a journey yourself. You told me kids are growing up beyond maybe what you even want at this point. And life has kind of got you thinking some different directions, or maybe leveraging what you've been learning for a long time in a new release of a new book.
Yeah.
And it hasn't even come out yet, right? When does it officially release?
I think it's May 20th.
May 20th.
That's
So we're
Yeah.
recording in February, and so it's still got a couple months to go. You were gracious enough to give us at least a little bit of a prequel to, because it is a preview. And I think we listened to, what did you think, the first intro and the first
just
chapter?
the intro. It's a
Okay.
longer intro. It feels like a chapter, but it let me rephrase. It's a good intro. It's
it's
not a
all right.
skippable forward acknowledgments kind of intro. It's like a real intro.
Well, and we'll get to this, but like the book has it seems to have a very intense but very intentional format. That you're not just trying to teach something, but you're trying to get the people that are reading to interact
Yeah.
with what you're teaching.
Absolutely.
And so let's just go ahead and jump into it. The name of the book,
Thinning the Veil.
Thinning the Veil, and
Insert subtitle here. I forgot
Encountering Jesus Christ
Yes.
in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
so
Thank
for
you.
some of you now, this is the first time you just perked up because you heard the special word that every Christian sometimes just wants to know more and more about is this revelation. And
the best and worst book in the Bible.
I think he's gonna have a specific opinion about that.
That's great.
He may
That's
have-
great.
So just to launch the discussion, because I do think the verbiage and the way that you are illustrating what this book is and why it's worth leaning into, and even the purpose behind it. I think you said multiple times, like the context matters of like especially this book. But why do you feel like to the Christians at times Revelation seems to have been misinterpreted, or maybe people want certain things to come out of it that sometimes just don't?
Yeah. I think there's actually multiple answers to that. When I sat down to write this one, which is actually the second time I've sat down to write this one.
Really?
So in the introduction of Between Two Trees, I even say, like, I sat down to write this book on Revelation.
I remember that.
And this book
You're
came
on a
out.
vacation, right?
Yeah.
I remember that.
So this is the second time I sat down, but it struck me, it was like, I think one of the major issues when it comes to Revelation is we overlook the first 5 words of the book.
Yes.
And I think Revelation tells you right off the bat what the book is about, but we have a resistance to it. And the first 5 words are the revelation of Jesus Christ. Like the whole purpose of the book is to reveal Jesus more clearly to those that follow him. And I hate to say it this way, but there's almost, whenever I teach that, there are people that initially are almost disappointed that's like all that the book is about. They want it to be about, the blood red moon, or the fact that, the 7 of the planets aligned this, a month ago.
All the stars fell from the sky.
Right, or the eclipse, or the red heifers, or the, Gaza conflicts. And I think the reason why, I think they're doing 2 things there. The reason why that they're obsessed with that, like, what is the word?
Well, it seems to be a narrative that they've like perceived.
Yes, and I think it's for 2 reasons though. Number one, they want their lives in the present to be significant. In the story of God.
Yeah,
and so
we all do.
100%.
We all do.
And that's not we do this in our own ways. It's just that in this particular way with prediction, it's like if I can crack this code, then surely my life matters if Jesus comes back during it. And my response to that is your life matters regardless if Jesus comes back in it or not.
Yeah.
You're a part of his story that's unfolding. The second reason why I think they do it is has a little bit more of an edge. I also think though that prediction can be a good distraction. If we can focus on the future and have this book be talking about the future, then we don't have to deal with our own disobedience in the present.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well,
they love chapters like 4 through 19.
Yeah.
But 2 and 3,
yeah.
where'd they go?
So do you think too that it's maybe a poor job of, I always like it when I say this, poor job of the church teaching, and I'm a teacher at a church.
Sure.
But is it a poor job sometimes of them understanding what Jesus is talking about too, where the kingdom is now? And they're like waiting for some far off full revelation, but at the same time missing the fact that the opportunity to experience the kingdom is right now. And if they don't enjoy that, they may not enjoy what's coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's interesting though is Revelation. You are right. Like we have this, we're looking for that. We were looking for when all the wrongs will be made right.
Yeah.
And we define that as the kingdom. Ironically though, Revelation 1 verses 5 and 6 says that, he, by his blood, he has purchased you and made you into a kingdom and priests. Like he calls us a kingdom right off the very beginning. Yeah. Us. And I think that also is a little bit terrifying for Christians.
Oh yeah.
Like we're okay with claiming the titles in the New Testament as name tags to be worn, but we're not really okay with claiming them as identities to be enfleshed.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the kingdom, it's safer to talk about it then, because when we look at, frankly, when we look around us and we look and then internally, there's a lot of non-kingdom things that seem to be reigning.
Yeah.
But the New Testament's pretty clear. It seems to suggest that what Jesus came to do, establish a kingdom, he did through the church. And the responsibility, though, of us in the church is to actually embody that.
Well, and I mean, not to get too philosophical, but I do feel like the kingdom is best displayed by someone sacrificially dying over and over and over again. That's how new kingdoms are born, at least the kingdom of Christ or the kingdom of Jesus. So I don't know if I found this as being a dad or a father is like the more selfless I am and the more selfless I am in my love, I feel like the better my family does.
Yeah.
And the better our home does.
Yeah.
It's just hard to pay that price and to trust the outcome of dying
Yeah.
to win.
Yeah, it's hard to trust it because it's like we can see our dad or our kids making all the, like, we can easily put character descriptions on there, character traits. But what we're doing right now, we just kind of view as neutral.
Yeah.
I'm just going through the motions or whatever, not realizing that the next generation that we're impacting, even coworkers or whatever, will put those same big character traits on us, those same summary statements, and not see our everyday living as neutral. But they'll say like, he's always hungry or thirsty. He's always going to get a drink somewhere, or he's always like in a rush, always whatever. Where that seems neutral to us, we're taking care of our responsibilities. It's like, that's who they are, not that's what they're doing. But we're so slow to put that own character trait on ourselves.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good way of helping me understand why I think sometimes Revelation never actually gets to the root of what it's trying to teach, because we never get there. And, it's very similar to like things that are overlooked in our culture because they're hard to understand, difficult to get. Obviously, like, depending on where you grew up, we can even see this in racial cultures, economic cultures, different, places along the world. If you want to go to Africa and bring your culture over there, it'll be very different than Western culture, very different than Eastern culture. And I feel like the Bible, because we're working inside the culture that it was created in with the imagery that it was using to create it in. I always like bringing up this example, and then we'll get to the one I really want to. But if you never watched The Office and you hear people just make inside jokes constantly, you'll be lost.
And some of the lines would just seem totally offensive.
Yes.
And you didn't know it was satire.
Wild.
Yeah.
And the characters would be like, I would never want to be that or mimic that or be a part of that. And but yet you would also miss the love story. And you would also miss the beautiful parts. And the narrative as a whole is, even as the stupid as some of the characters are, they're the most lovable characters. Right. And like it just has so much nuance to get there. Do you feel like Revelation, that's like its central issue most of the time for why it's so hard for people to genuinely understand it?
Yeah, yes. So one of the things I tried to do in this book, so chapter 1, I tried to get into the body and the mind and the heart of John, who is isolated on the island of Patmos. And so chapter 1 of the book begins, not just of Revelation, but of Thinning the Veil. It begins with talking about loneliness. Because I'm sitting there thinking, when John's sitting on Patmos by himself, I bet you loneliness would consume him in the same way it has consumed me at various times in my life. And whenever you are lonely and you're pressed to that breaking point emotionally, you start acting erratically. And in Revelation, you see John acting erratically. Like John, like in Revelation 5, there's, the one on the throne's holding the scroll in his hand. And it just says John just breaks down weeping uncontrollably. He just can't stop. And then twice in Revelation, John bows down and worships an angel. And you're like, this is an apostle. Like, what's he doing?
Yeah. Well, Hebrews clearly says don't.
Right. I mean, but I think what you see is that John is pushed to his emotional breaking point. And that in his loneliness, he's actually literally acting outside of who he truly is. And whenever you start to see that the characters that are writing the New Testament are people like you and me, it starts to enflesh it in a way that, again, I think at times can come a little bit more too close for comfort. But at times, whenever you do put it in that context, don't get me wrong, like, I mean, there's tons of stuff with the first century world and the Greco-Roman culture colliding with the Jewish culture inside of Asia Minor, which is all Revelation stuff. But one of the things I try to, teach my students in doing this book is say, hey, let's not forget, like, one thing that actually spans all cultures is we're humans. And we have very shared experiences like loneliness.
So let me ask this, and this might get us off topic, so I don't want to spend too much time.
I'll get us back on topic after this.
So one of the things that's brought me great comfort is recognizing that Job was at least the earlier manuscript than Genesis. So one of the things I've talked about that's a comforting thought is not the first thought that any humans ever had was why I'm here. It's actually why am I hurting? And then Genesis becomes an answer to why you're hurting. And so my thought process then is, if I take Job and I turn him into John and I make Revelation an answer to Job, as much to John.
Absolutely.
And so it's an unfailing of like, not only am I going to restore you 10 times, but I'm actually going to bring you a Messiah that's going to make all things untrue.
Yeah.
And that it brings Job to his emotional breaking point, just like 42. Anyway, so that to me, it brings this bookend to the Bible in just this special, unique way that is a comfort beyond comfort.
Absolutely. And what I love about that, your connection there, is that in the same pathway to that comfort is why I think Revelation makes us uncomfortable. Because Christ doesn't, in Revelation especially, he doesn't just pull back the veil of heaven. He pulls back the veil of even evil.
Yes.
Allowing evil to be seen in all of its full forms. And frankly, what I find, truly fascinating is it's the same pattern of evil that we can see all throughout the Bible and frankly all throughout the last 2,000 years since Christ. Evil's pattern is super predictable. The uses of deception and fear of death, and Satan doesn't have to be creative because we fall for the same tricks every generation. Like he hasn't had to be creative once.
No.
But the same process of overcoming that deception is the same for Job as it is for John, as it is for me. It's to bring me to the end of myself. I mean, whenever I'm at the end of myself, and this is why I, in the book I say this, but I believe this to my core, is that Revelation chapter 1, verses 17 and 18 summarizes not only just the book of Revelation, but the gospel. It says, Jesus appears to John, and then it says, and John fell down as though dead. And then it says, and Jesus reached out and touched him, and then says, don't be afraid. But like it's whenever you fully embrace that process, it actually is not just the end of yourself; it's the beginning of what it means to live out the kingdom of Christ.
Wow!
And Revelation's goal, more than prediction, is to bring you to that end.
Yeah,
is to bring you to the end of yourself, so that you can actually see which kingdom you've been partnering with. Throughout your life thus far, even as a Christian. That's the irony.
Yeah.
Like, man, Revelation's in your face, but it's talking to Christians.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to throw the rock at the non-Christians saying you don't look like Christ, but Revelation's talking to Christ followers.
Well, and don't you, and I haven't read the rest of your books, so this is a good time. Like, do you feel like even the churches that he talks to in the first couple chapters, the intensity of what he's saying is going to be backed up by the rest of the book?
Absolutely.
Hey, I'm going to mention specifically, but here's why. You need to be intensely paying attention.
Absolutely. So yes. So what I chapter 1 is about loneliness, but chapter 2 of the book, when it talks about Revelation 2 and 3, the 7 churches, I was like, I'm not. What I wanted to emphasize there was Christ knows them intimately. Yeah. So intimacy dominates that chapter in the book, which is one of the most comforting things you can know, and one of the most terrifying things you can know, that Christ knows you intimately, because that means there is nothing you have done. Or nothing that you will do that he is not only aware of, but he's also present when it occurs. And that level of intimacy really brings on to stage things that are a little bit jarring. Yeah. But then what unfolds after that is saying, listen, I know that loneliness can cause you to not act like yourself, and I know you intimately. But there are clear processes by which we need to engage this. Yeah. And so the image of God in 4 and 5 is not only the identity of God unveiled, but it's the identity that we put on as Christ followers. So it's every chapter after that is actually building this response to their loneliness and the fact that he intimately knows them. Why? And this goes to the title of the book. Because the veil between heaven and earth is not as thick as we've assumed, or frankly at times want. We want it to be thick at times.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm going to take us back on track.
Sure.
After a brief time going off track.
Yeah.
One of my favorite episodes of this podcast that we've done is our episode on tattoos, which was like 107, 01, 13. And in doing some research for that, like my thoughts before that episode, before I did like looked up verses connected to that and ideas and themes and whatever, was like, well, Leviticus says not to get carvings or whatever.
Sure.
but we're in the New Testament. Point proven. Moving on, getting a tattoo. I don't have any tattoos in case anybody's watching and praying against me. But it brought up this whole. If you hate tattoos, only listen to the audio version of this. And every episode, we are pure. But the thing that it brought up is a thing that I remembered strongly from Revelation class with you 7 or whatever years ago, which is the idea that your allegiance to God, when everything's unveiled, is so obvious. It's like it's written on your forehead and your hand. Because 13, the end of 13, the mark of the beast, and everybody's worried that they're gonna like catch the mark of the beast, like it's infectious or whatever. Like you can trip and fall into the mark of the beast. But really, this is your allegiance. Where the chapter right after that, you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, goes to the 144th. 7 is the 144,000 and the 12 tribes and the great multitude, and 14 does the same thing.
Similar, yeah.
But they all have a marking on them, or they're all in the Lamb's Book of Life. I'm pretty sure they'll have a marking though.
Yeah, they do.
And Jesus in 19 has a marking on him, and they're all these like allegiance markers in general.
Yeah.
That like the and not just I'm saying I'm allegiant, but like who you're actually allegiant to is so obvious. It's like it's written on you.
Yeah.
Well, that does apply to Leviticus and how it's talking about you're all freed slaves from Egypt. Don't hold on to any of your Egyptian cattle branded things claiming you to be the property of other gods, claiming you to be whatever. But then Isaiah 27, 5, 4, somewhere in there in the mid-20s, it's talking about allegiance to God. And it's like some will say, I'm allegiant to God, and some will call the name of Jacob. Some will write Yahweh's name on their arm. And then Deuteronomy, the Shema, have it hanging from the tassels of your coat and on your door frame and whatever. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You should love the Lord your God. If that's not allegiance language, I don't know what is. And so like this whole theme of like the you think it's hidden, that you can, as David, say you're Israel's king and you're following God, but your secret sin and your secret allegiance to your own appetite, when we pulled back the veil, it's written right across your forehead between your eyes and your hairline.
And I think that is a really important thing to think about too, is like the allegiant portion of Revelation, I think gets overlooked. I think because of, you know, some of Hollywood's versions of like, you're just going to like zap and your clothes are going to be gone. And like people are going to almost like a mixture of World of War or World at War. What is that? No, War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise, where it's like these guys show up and they're just going to start zapping everybody. And then like this dragon's going to show up and swallow some babies.
And it scares us into wanting to find the hard line. Well, have you said the magic formula? Are you in?
So I guess the language that I love about your book is this idea of the thinning of the veil. You know, there's so many cool images around that are powerful in my mind. One of them, of my dad and I talk about a lot, is called thinning spaces. Thin spaces are when people are close to death. So it's like when the world starts to combine, where it's like heaven and earth meet, is like right before the end of, and what people think about in
his dad's a chaplain.
Thinning spaces.
My dad's a hospice chaplain.
So like what the people talk about in that thin space is like really, really important. And you know, Andy Stanley teaches that you only celebrate 2 things at every funeral. It's who you loved and who loved you. That's the only things you celebrate. And so, you know, it's whose you are and whose you were. And so, you know, this book, I think, is just trying to remind you who Jesus is not for and who Jesus is for. Over and over. You said 7 times the world comes to an end in Revelation. So it's 7 times over. He's declaring who wins and who loses. And that's wild.
Absolutely. And even just kind of combining both of what you guys said, like Revelation, when it comes to allegiance, it really does. It makes it so starkly clear that it gets uncomfortable for the reader. It's saying, it's asking the question, you know, which Trinity are you following? Because in Revelation, you know, you have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and they parallel in the imagery, the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth. And the way that their ministries function are parallel, but each of them are trying to court a people. And there are significant qualities that each of the people groups have. And how do you attain those qualities? Through the allegiance. So the allegiance, who you're aligned with. So one of the lines I say in the book is, in the book of Revelation, worship is war, but who you worship, you become. And that's a part of the convicting aspect of this is allegiance defines the identity that I receive, not just my identity, but the identity from which my action flows. Because action always is birthed from who you are. So whenever you have Christians then, both in the 1st century and the 21st century, and their actions do not align with Christ, the question then becomes, I don't care what you're saying, your actions tell me your allegiance is something different.
Yeah.
And Revelation does not mess around with this, which is one of the reasons why I think it is a fascinating satanic strategy to get Revelation to not be as palpable in the church today, not as powerful. Make it about prediction, because if they truly saw what Christ was calling them to or confronting them with in the present with their actions, the church could actually rise up and be what it is that Satan doesn't want it to be. And that is the hands and feet of Christ. So absolutely, allegiance is an essential component of identity. And I do wonder in my own heart, but especially as the church as a whole, maybe one of the most important questions we could be asking to ourselves today is, so who am I? And who am I following? And how do my actions betray that?
Yeah.
Because I do think the war in our world today is over identity.
Wow.
I think that is the issue.
So teaching, I just taught us a sermon this last week. You talked a little bit about this, but
This is what's on track.
yeah.
If you like what you've heard so far, we started the Kingsway Book Club. We've got episodes coming out about once a month, and then we're telling you the next book we're doing. This book is going to be a part of the Kingsway Book Club. It just can't be yet because it's not out.
Yep.
So
it will be.
if you liked this part of the conversation, pay attention again in like 6 months or whatever when it comes out.
So
you'll hear more about it.
We were talking about just this idea of like Jesus talking about the Bible and then teaching the Bible more intensely. What it sounds like to me, that maybe I'm making this connection poorly, but it's like at the end, John is almost like connecting with this revelation, the depth of the needed allegiance to Jesus that is greater than the law and greater than even memorization or religious ceremony. It seems like it's something great, because obviously the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus does this over and over again. It's like, you said we're not supposed to murder, I tell you hate. You say you're not supposed to commit adultery, I tell you lust. So calling people to the carpet on the level of like the intensity of that. Do you feel like Revelation is doing that yet again with imagery, or like is it doing the same thing as the Sermon on the Mount, or different things, or more things?
No, actually, that's actually a question I deal with a couple of times in the book. So Revelation is saturated with the Old Testament. So, 404 verses. There, by my count, there's over 516 allusions to the Old Testament.
Holy cow.
So
500, how many?
516 over.
Jeez.
So over one every verse. It's alluding to it.
That I was just about to ask how many
Constantly.
verses are in Revelation.
Yeah,
That's
so 404. And so you're having this constant conversation. I think John's doing two things at once. Number one, I think what he's saying is this isn't old, or this isn't new in the sense of divorced from. It's the culmination of a conversation we've been having for 65 books.
Wow.
Like number one. But number two, what he's also saying is but if you don't read like the revelation of God through the lens of Christ, you're not understanding the revelation of God. So he at times will take Old Testament texts and he'll say, yeah, the common interpretation of it goes this way. So, for example, the winepress of God's fury in Revelation 14. And he's like, the winepress of God's fury, when you read that in Isaiah, 63? I mean, it is the most vicious imagery of this one trampling the nations under its feet, and his robe is crimson. He's squashing them like grapes. Well, when you get to 14, it's actually us that's in the winepress, where he's saying, you follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And where did the Lamb go? To his own sacrifice on Calvary.
Gosh.
So what is the Christian call?
Take up your cross.
To be willing to crawl into the winepress of God's fury on behalf of the greatest enemies in your story.
Ooh.
And that's the part of Revelation that I think,
That's
frankly,
why I don't read Revelation.
That's why I read Philippians. It makes me happy.
let me rephrase it. I think that's the call of grace.
Ooh.
I think grace's greatest call and greatest cost is not so much what you receive, but what it is it asks you then to give to those that have hurt you most.
So that's why when I'm Christ for my family, I feel most like I'm divinely fulfilling what God asked me to do.
Yeah, either that or whenever you're Christ for the babysitter that molested you when you were 6.
Okay, yeah. I should be able to love my family a little better.
You see how that takes it to a different level?
So this last week, I was tempted to preach a sermon by just talking about the Good Samaritan and making it the illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Didn't do that because that was like more mean, and I don't think that's how Jesus approached issues all the time.
Yes and no. So this is what's interesting. So in Revelation chapter 6, you have the martyrs under the altar in heaven. They cry out, "How long, O Lord, do you avenge our blood?" And my response to that is, that's a normal human response to when we've been wronged.
Yeah.
And I don't think what God ever says to them is, you're not allowed to say that. But his response to them is super fascinating, though. So they're saying, "How long do you avenge my blood?" And God goes, "Okay, here's a T-shirt, but actually it's the white robe." And then he says, "More of you need to die." Now here's what's fascinating about that. The white robe is a symbol for victory.
Okay.
He looks at him and says, "You're asking a question as if you think you've lost. I'm just here to tell you, you've actually won, and we're going to win more by more people dying." Because so this is the irony, is that I think God is actually confronting the question of the martyrs in heaven in Revelation 6, where they are articulating the common human experience. But God says, but the most truly human experience is Christ's cross, which is something we don't believe. And this is, I think, what Revelation confronts. And I think you guys have even mentioned this on some level already. We don't truly trust that how God says the world works is the way the world works.
Yeah.
Love your enemy and pray for those that persecute you. And we go, that's not the way that's not the way you win.
So have you ever connected that? Because I love that thought so much. You ever connected that to John 11 with Lazarus and his sisters? Because in my mind, that feels like the same thing that Jesus is confronting there.
Yeah.
Where he's like, don't you believe that he will be risen again?
Yeah.
And like, don't you trust that what I'm saying is true?
Yeah.
And like, they're like, sure, but like, he's still dead.
Yeah.
Like, where is he?
Yeah.
You know, and if John is the author of both,
Absolutely.
like that's wild to
No,
me.
you're
And
right.
that's also the central theme of his gospel, because that's where everything goes flying from. These are my children calling me 3 times.
That's awesome.
Cinderella's castle. That's our home line. It's hilarious. Call your mom. No, that is such. Oh, and that is the most comforting verse in the entire Bible to me. That it's a sermon that I heard a long time ago, because in that moment in John, which gives maybe comfort to the martyrs, but Jesus has the best surprise of all time. But before he rushes to the surprise, he sits in the pain of the sisters and cries.
Yeah.
So he doesn't rush through the human pain. He
No.
sits with it far before he exposes the celebration.
Absolutely.
So that means that he's not pitying us. It doesn't just go like, "You idiot kid, why are you crying?"
Right.
Or he actually goes, "This is actually really painful."
Absolutely.
And even before I raise him from the grave, I'm going to sit with that for a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah. Why rush over the reality of what it means to be truly human?
Exactly.
And so, and that's the thing I want us in the church to continue to try to reclaim. It's not curating people's reactions that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, there are certain things that happen in our world and in our lives that demand anger.
Oh yeah.
And that's what the martyrs are. They're angry. And I don't
Absolutely.
think that's unholy.
No.
But what you do with it, how it motivates you and to what action. I believe that it was the anger that caused Christ to cry in John 11 that gave him the power to cry out, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing," as he's hanging on the cross.
Absolutely.
It's the same move.
That's so.
And that's where the profundity for me of understanding even what an emotion like anger is. You know, anger is a mask of sadness. That's all that it really is.
Or loneliness.
Yes. That congeals to a point of rage.
Yeah.
And I see in Revelation, like the Psalms, I see Revelation creating space for that emotion. But then In that same way, though, God goes, but I'm not going to allow the space I've created for that emotion to take you to places that ultimately won't guide you back to me.
Yeah.
Like I want your anger towards what Satan has been doing and is doing to you and to others to motivate you to lay your life down for the people that follow Satan.
Yeah.
It's almost like you can be angry, but you still got to get on the cross.
100%.
Like you still got to do what I'm calling you to do.
Yeah.
You see that in the Garden of Gethsemane too. Like
That's exactly
He
right.
doesn't want necessarily the way that this is going to go.
It's like anger is like sadness plus urgency.
Yeah.
It's like, I got to do something about this. Where that urgency is like Saul on the battlefield, and he just goes ahead and makes a sacrifice. The priests aren't here yet. I'm just going to do it. It's not worth waiting for. Or Abram, God promised me a child or children, and through them it's going to come a great nation. I'm 80, 90, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give God a head start. I'll sleep with my wife's servant. Totally circumnavigating the plan God had for you, assuming God's hands were tied and he forgot about it. It's on the back burner. He's going to give it up. Like, no.
Yeah, and that's why I think we should respect the complexities of urgency itself.
Yeah.
Because urgency plus sadness, I mean, if that guides me to a holy, not just an anger, but holy motion, then that is a holy emotion, a holy way of responding. But urgency or impatience can actually lead us to a lot of things like vengeance.
Yeah.
Which is not ultimately. And so there's I think that, and I've even dealt with students before where they're describing to me a situation. I actually had to tell this young lady once, which described to me a very disturbing situation. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there. I said, I don't think you're angry enough to actually deal with this. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I said, you're giving grace to the person that has hurt you. And I appreciate, and we need to get to that too. But I said, but it's almost like you're dismissing it, downplaying what really happened. Have you really been fully angry about how you were treated in this situation? And she basically said, I didn't know there was room for that in Christianity. And I said, read the Psalms, read Revelation.
Yeah.
Read Exodus 34, slow to anger.
Right. But what people today do with I think we need a better theology of anger in the church. People are angry, but they don't know what to do with it. 100%. They don't know how to motivate them. And what they're typically doing is they're partnering with Satan's agenda more effectively through their anger than Christ's. So Revelation pulls it all out and it says, I'm not upset the fact you're asking for vengeance, but the first thing you need to remember is you've already won. And the second thing you need to remember is my strategy to win is when more of you die.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden takes your anger, honors it, but it actually doesn't allow you to dictate the direction it's going to go with it. Yeah. Revelation is teasing this out. It's really, I think, one of the most truly human books in the New Testament.
Wow. I've never thought of it as a gift to John either. And that was one of the things I really liked that you were talking about, drawing it to the author. Because if John's I think, suffers the worst, if he's truly isolated, the last left.
Yeah.
He suffers the worst fate out of them all.
Yeah.
We would say that equating it now to like dementia or like having this person waste away in a retirement home. Most of us would just say, take me out to a field and shoot me. Don't let me be there. And this is basically what happens to John. And then you want to talk about testing of your faith, that you're like, this better be worth it. All my friends, everyone is gone. There's a quote by A.W. Tozer that I think about quite often, that it's funny that we were talking about Enneagrams earlier and pain is like my weakness. And I had this above my desk for years before I ever knew. And it's doubtful that God can use a man greatly until he has wounded him deeply.
Wow.
And I remember reading that, and it stung me in like a way that like felt deeply like, I know there's meaning behind this, but I was 25 years old, had no kids yet, barely married. And I was like, I haven't really experienced a whole lot of pain yet.
No.
And so I'm like, well, if that's the equation, why would A.W. Tozer write that? I'm like, why would you even say that? But I knew it was true. Yeah. And then as life goes on, it is that idea of like, take up your cross. You're going to suffer so that my name will grow. You're going to die so that others will live. Yeah. Just like I did. And that death, we think of it as a one-time thing. Yeah. Like, oh, there'll be a moment like, right?
Yeah.
And what you're telling me is Revelation says it's at least 7.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, ow.
But it's so much easier to make one grand sacrifice that everybody sees than 1,000 invisible small sacrifices.
Yeah.
Or to even put it in a different way, whenever I went through, so I'm 42 now, but around like 34, 35, I was going through just some dark wrestlings with the Lord, which I've learned over the years that He's like, hey, when you're praying, Shane, I don't want you to hold anything back. And so in one of those moments, I was like, you know what? Because I used to always kind of feel like I was going to die young. So like summer after 9/11, I'm like, I'm going to the Middle East and ministering to Muslims. Like, I'm going to go and evangelize. Like, 'cause that's the best way I know how to fight any sort of war is through the healing power of Jesus Christ. So, and I multiple times, in my 20s especially, I mean, this close to death, like pulled into back alleys and almost plane crash. And I'm like, man,
this is it.
I went through a pretty deep spiritual crisis when I was 34, 35. And I finally just had the conversation with the Lord and just said, listen, you may have been tempted in every way that I am and was without sin, but the one thing you didn't do was turn 34.
Ooh.
And I said, the thing that really bothers me about that is I have to die of old age.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here. And then I realized my favorite apostle was John. And I think you're right. He's having the same existential moment where he was, and that's why in Revelation, John, he talks about martyrdom. Or I should say, he draws pictures of martyrdom more along the lines of a gift to be received because he himself was never offered the gift.
Wow.
So you cannot seek death in the same way that in Revelation 9, the followers of evil do. Instead, what you can do is play your role and be faithful to it, knowing that regardless of the loneliness, that the intimacy of Christ will carry you through if you continue to willingly bring all that you are to Him and let Him transform it for His kingdom. But usually what we do is we find unique ways to self-medicate, whether that be raging on a social media post or turning on some news station and then yelling at the screen or a football game, or we find unique ways to self-medicate that at times are socially acceptable or maybe even culturally advantageous. At other times, it's just, run-of-the-mill alcohol. Bottom line is we're all trying to find unique ways to satiate the cravings and, frankly, the struggles of what it means to be human.
Oh, yeah.
And Revelation says instead of trying to avoid it, the only way that pain can be dealt with is by walking toward it. Pain is an organism, and it only shrinks when you walk toward it.
Absolutely.
Which is why I think one of the very first things Jesus says to John is, don't be afraid. Because fear causes us to run into directions that even gives pain a greater hold on us, that causes our anger to do things that Christ never would command.
So I know this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I love that thought so much. And I've been studying this a little bit. Do you know there's only one time that I could find that Jesus doesn't tell someone not to be afraid when he encounters them?
Huh. What is that?
It's Paul on the road to Damascus.
No kidding. So a confrontation moment.
He just goes, "What are you doing?"
You should be afraid. That's really fascinating.
So his track is the opposite of John's. By the end of his life, he's now on his knees going, my strength is made perfect in your weakness, Paul. So his track is the opposite of most of the apostles. It's pretty wild as I've been looking at it. Like, this is a guy that he had to have his pride torn down because he thought he was worthy.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I'm the greatest of the Pharisees. Like, and God's like,
dang, that's pretty.
You should just sit down for a minute and listen.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just find that curious that his lesson, though, gets him to the same place. Gets him to the same place by the end of his life. Are you going to trust me that my power is greater, even when you feel like nothing?
Man.
And I find that comforting because that confidence ends up being his greatest ally because he's like, I'm going to Rome and I'm going to do whatever God, and he knows that he's going to suffer, but he has to trust in God's power. So if you could take the book, and I know this is we've had such a good conversation, Shane. I really appreciate your time so much. If you could take one thing from your book and you could synthesize it down for somebody that's maybe been grown up in a church or grown up in a culture that has put fear in their heart, or maybe they even have a confidence that maybe they're seeing it kind of crumble a little bit of I thought this was going to be the thing that was going to make me feel most stable in my faith, and now that seems to have not, it's not happening how I thought it would play out. And I think what's ultimately happening is their view of God is kind of changing. What would your book do to speak to that person that would allow this thinning of the veil to be actually a gift that I think it ultimately is?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, to kind of come full circle on one of the first questions is, about why is it that at times revelation is being used to predict? It is we are searching for meaning in our lives, and I think what Revelation says is there is significant meaning in who you are, and you find that by realizing how close God is willing to draw near. And that's one of the things that Revelation to me is, frankly, the whole Bible is fascinating to me. I had somebody recently ask me, like, if you were going to teach a course on the entire Bible, what is the one thread that you would pull from Genesis all the way to Revelation?
That's a good thought.
Without even blinking, I was like, God's pursuit. It is absurd how much he relentlessly pursues at every step of the journey. And Revelation's no different. And I think if we allow the book of Revelation to really, in a sense, grab a hold of that message, it's been coming since Genesis, and we realize that God's pursuit is unending, and he will even fight us for us.
Hope you guys enjoyed the first half of our interview with Shane Wood. Second half is coming next week, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.